If you want to start out in photography in the year 2025, you will not need a setup that will cost you like $5,000 or even more. And I started out with photography over a decade ago. And honestly, in the beginning, I made quite a few mistakes. And if I had to start all over again in this year, I would do a lot of things differently. And I want to talk about that in today's video. So let's dive right in. Hello my friends and welcome to this video today. So when I first started out with photography in the year 2012, which is almost 13 years ago at this point, the world of photography looked quite different from what it is today. For example, a so-called DSLR was the gold standard back then. DSLR basically stands for Digital Single Lens Reflective Camera, which basically just means it is a huge bulky camera with a mirror inside it. Nowadays we have mirrorless cameras, which were merely a thing in 2012. They are way smaller, way more compact, and they offer a few benefits over DSLRs, but I will talk about that more in a second. So if I had to start all over again this year, then I would do a lot of things differently with the available technology that we have today, and I want to explain more about this today, so let's begin. So before we can dive into real gear recommendations that I can give you of products that you can order right now from the internet, for example, I first want to talk about something else here. So chances are that if you watch this video, photography will be a new hobby to you, which is awesome. You know, I love photography, it is a great hobby. But when you just start out with a new hobby, not just photography, it's always tempting to think that you will need basically everything that is out there on your first day. For example, the best camera, the best lenses, all the accessories that someone told you is amazing on TikTok, for example. But honestly, as I said, it might be a new hobby to you, so you don't really know if you really enjoy it all that much. I mean, it's something different to watch someone, for example, take beautiful pictures and to go out there by yourself. So I believe it's not worth spending thousands of dollars on your first setup, for example. Matter of fact, I would argue that this even can slow you down and hurt your progress. So I believe in the beginning it's way more important to learn the basics of photography. For example, to learn what different settings do to your picture, like for example the exposure triangle or how to frame a shot. And the good news is this is really not so hard to learn, it's pretty straightforward. But to master this craft, and not just to know what settings do, but really understand and get the feeling for photography, basically this is a task of a lifetime. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a master of photography by any means, and I'm doing this for over 10 years. So I believe this is awesome because you can always learn something new. Every time you go out and shoot, you will learn something new, you will get experience, and this is really awesome. But you can do this with a fairly cheap setup, I believe, in the beginning. So let's talk about cameras now. So the first thing I would definitely recommend, and is something that I would totally do, is look at the used market, because on the used market you will find some older cameras. These cameras, they are still pretty good even today, and it is absolutely enough for anything that you could wish for when you start out with photography. And I've watched a couple of videos here on YouTube, and a lot of people recommend that you should go with an old DSLR camera. But nowadays we have mirrorless cameras where we have a small display in the viewfinder where you can look at, and this comes with a lot of benefits. You will be able to see exactly what you have in focus through, for example, focus peaking features. Another benefit of mirrorless cameras would be the compact size, because you don't have this huge mirror. You basically can build really compact and small cameras, which comes in pretty handy when you want to travel, for example, with your camera. So I would definitely recommend looking at the used market and go with a mirrorless camera. And the biggest argument for DSLR cameras would be the cheap price, because they are old. But honestly, mirrorless cameras are around for quite a while as well. So when you look at the used market, why don't look at mirrorless cameras as well and find a good deal there? Another thing that has to be considered is the sensor size of your camera. Basically, a lot of entry-level cameras have an APS-C size sensor, which basically means the sensor is way bigger than any smartphone could ever have, but it is not as big as a full-frame camera. And I would definitely recommend going with a full-frame camera right from the start. This is something that I would do do, because you will have all the benefits. For example, most likely a better low light performance, a shallower depth of field, which is always desirable if you want to, for example, take portrait shots. And honestly, as I said, when you look at the used market, they are not as expensive. So for example, I have one here. This is a Sony A7 III, the second generation of this camera. You can get this camera for around $600, only the body. But it is a reasonably modern full-frame camera. It is 10 years old. I made a video about this camera a few weeks ago. You can check that out as well. But it performs pretty good. So this is totally something that I would do, go with something like that. What you have to consider is that the lenses for full-frame cameras, they are a little bit more expensive. But again, you can look at the used market as well, and you can keep these lenses basically forever. Because when you go with an APS-C lens, which is optimized for the APS-C size sensor, you will run into problems when you upgrade to a full frame camera later. However, when you have a lens that is already made for full frame, then you can use it, as I said, forever. And even if you upgrade the camera, you can just keep the lenses. So what I've done is I made a list of cameras that I would consider buying for different price points. For example, we have the low budget options where you find cameras from all the way $400 up to around $700. Then we have some cameras from $700 to $1,000 and some cameras that will be over $1,000 to $1,400, somewhat in this regime of pricing. So there are a ton of other cameras out there as well. And there are other manufacturers out there as well. For example, I haven't listed Fujifilm here, which produce amazing cameras also. But these are the most common camera brands, I believe. I've linked Nikon, Sony and Canon here. And this camera is also not meant to be a comprehensive review of all of these cameras. So basically this is something where you have to decide for yourself and you have to do additional research on the internet, for example, in forums here on YouTube, to find the best camera system for you. As I said, this would be way too much for a single video here, so I will not do this. However, you will find these cameras and you can dive deeper into what each camera can do best, where the manufacturers maybe lack something. You will have to do additional research. I hope that is understandable at this point. So the next thing I want to talk about are lenses, and lenses are even more important than the camera body itself, because a camera without a lens, it will produce a picture, but it will be worth nothing because it is totally blurred out. So you will need a lens for your camera. And in the beginning I would also recommend to keep it simple, not buy like 5 different lenses at the same time, because it just will be too much basically. You should focus on maybe one lens at a time. And basically there are 2 camps of people there. The one side, they will recommend going with a prime lens, so a lens that cannot zoom in or zoom out. And the other people, they recommend you a zoom lens. For example, a standard zoom lens where you have some zoom to zoom in and zoom out, create different things. And for example, prime lenses, they are great because they are a little bit cheaper, they are really sharp, they are high quality, and they have a really wide aperture, which means you have great low light performance and you will get this beautiful blurred out background that everyone loves. For this reason, I would say prime lenses are good. However, I still would recommend going with a standard zoom lens in the beginning, even though this is not a simple choice there. So a standard zoom lens, it will give you the versatility of, exploring different types of photography. And again, these lenses, they are pretty cheap on the used market. You can look, for example, for third-party manufacturers, so not the original Sony lenses, in my case, for example, or Canon lenses, but for example, lenses from Sigma or from Tamron. Tamron is even a little bit cheaper than Sigma, for example, and they have really good lenses. I have one right here. And honestly, if you look on the used market, it is not too hard to find a good used lens, a 24, or in Tamron's case, a 28 to 75 millimeter lens for around $500 there, to get a pretty good and compact and versatile package of a camera that you can use for a lot of things. And this is also something that I definitely would recommend, to not box yourself in basically and think that you have to decide for one style or one field of photography on day one, because I believe that you should definitely explore different fields of photography in the beginning to learn what you like the most. And I do this even to this day, that I try out different things. My hobby and passion is landscape and nature photography, for example. But a couple of years back, I discovered portrait photography for myself as well. And I also managed to make money from it with, for example, wedding photography in my case. So try out different things, go out, try landscape, try nature, maybe wildlife portrait, all of this stuff. It's all amazing. And you can decide for one field of photography later or never maybe. So all the people out there that say that you only can master one field of photography, that might be true, that you only can become a real master, for example, in landscape photography and nothing else. As I said, it might be true, but it's nothing worse in the beginning. So definitely try out different things and just enjoy photography. So here we are, nearly at the end of this video again. And to wrap things up, I would get myself a used full frame camera. I would get myself a used standard zoom lens, for example, a 24 to 70mm lens. There are a few additional things that I would think about getting. For example, a tripod, which is always really useful when you want to do, for example, nature photography. You don't need to buy the most expensive tripod in the beginning. Just look at something that is stable, because there is nothing more annoying than, having a tripod tipping over or breaking when your camera is attached to it. Another thing that I would think about is getting some filters for my camera, for example, a neutral density ND filter, so you can do longer exposures and they will give you really beautiful looks sometimes in your pictures. This is something that I would definitely think about. And what I would also get is a copy of Lightroom, for example. You don't really need Photoshop anymore, honestly. You will find better and cheaper options. For example, when you look at websites like Canva will not replace Photoshop totally in the moment, but for most use cases it's more than enough. But Lightroom is a pretty useful tool, and you definitely want to have something to edit your photos, because if you want to start out with photography, you definitely need to shoot in RAW. But this is a topic for another video, I believe. This will be the software side of things, and today we just talked about hardware there. And if you have watched so far, thank you so much for doing so. I have a ton of other videos about photography related topics over on my YouTube channel, also for people who are just starting out, but also for people who are a little bit more and deeper into the photography topic already. So feel free to check them out as well. Also feel free to leave a like, a comment maybe, or even a subscribe. That would be awesome. But for now, I wish you a great day. I wish you a great week, and I hope I see you in next week's video. So see you then maybe, and goodbye.